Welcome to Voices of the Community, which explores critical issues facing Northern California communities. We introduce you to the voices of community thought leaders and change makers who are working on solutions that face our fellow individual community members, neighborhoods, cities, and our region. This is George Koster, your host. This episode is part of our series exploring COVID-19's impact on nonprofits and small businesses in the San Francisco Bay Area. Back in April of 2020, when we decided to create this ongoing series on COVID-19's impact, first on nonprofits and then on small businesses in the San Francisco Bay Area, we, like you, had no idea how long the pandemic would go on and what the health and economic impact would be in our community. As we enter the second half of 2022 with the latest explosion of cases from the most recent COVID-19 Omicron mutations, along with the masking requirements being changed and folks getting their vaccinations, our communities are still struggling to deal with the health, economic, mental, and societal impacts of the ongoing global pandemic. This all adds to the ongoing uncertainty of our ever-changing indoor and outdoor, vaccinated and unvaccinated protocols, and the politics of the pandemic that will drive how we all come back together as a unified or fractured community. We will continue to shine a spotlight on the nonprofits and small businesses that make up the fabric of our community, along with the founders and staff who are struggling to deal with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on their operations, services, and sustainability until we can all get to the other side of the pandemic. Along the way, we will also share with you all the amazing solutions that our nonprofits, small businesses, foundations, and government leaders are working on to help us all get to the other side of the pandemic and come together to rebuild our communities with more economic, social, and environmental equality.
We're prognosticating going forward mean that there are really two things to think about here. One is the actual feel and look and composition of downtown, the commercial life, the life in general is quite deteriorated compared to what it was before the pandemic. The other thing to think about is that because of that and a number of other forces that stack on, it is possible that we're going to see not just the area, but the city as a whole suffer economically going forward. And that gets into issues like, well, if people aren't going downtown, those businesses aren't thriving.
This is the second part of the three-part stories we are covering on how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted the downtown community and economy of San Francisco, along with the efforts to address the issues and to reinvent downtown San Francisco. In this episode, we feature the voices of two local reporters, Anna Tong from the San Francisco Standard and Noah Arroyo from the San Francisco Chronicle, who are doing some great reporting on all of the issues plaguing downtown San Francisco, as well as some of the efforts by businesses, nonprofits, and the government to address the issues. I'm joined remotely by the data editor at the San Francisco Standard, Anna Tong, along with SF Next reporter from the San Francisco Chronicle, Noah Arroyo. Welcome to Voices of the Community, Anna and Noah.
Hi, nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Very excited to be here.
And it's great to meet you too, Anna.
Lovely to meet you, Noah. I've been really enjoying your work.
So let's start with basically having you share with the audience a little bit about your backgrounds as reporters and then why you both decided to dive in and do some reporting on our downtown San Francisco issues. So Anna, let's start with you.
So I just came back into journalism earlier this year, so in January 2022. And before that, I spent 10 years working in tech. So I was a tech worker in San Francisco, and I was what's called a product manager. And I worked at Google and a bunch of other startups. And what led me to reporting about downtown is, as a former business person, I'm really interested in business and having worked downtown. I really liked working in downtown. I saw what was happening to downtown. And then I read, I think in Noah's excellent piece, that something like 75% of the city's GDP is driven by office workers. And so I just really wanted to know. I'm very, very curious. And I feel invested because I live in the city about, just what's going to happen to downtown. And I really want to report on that because for so long, SF has been a city with a downtown core where people are commuting in. And it's really not like that anymore.
Thank you. And Noah, a little bit about your background?
I've been reporting on San Francisco issues, including housing and homelessness, off and on for about a decade. And I came to the Chronicle to be a part of this SF Next project, which is trying to look at the potential solutions to long-term intractable problems that are in San Francisco. And so when we were all sitting down together, the team is assembled. I was looking at downtown. My boss is looking at downtown. We're going, there really isn't a bigger problem, it seems, than this, or a problem that touches more lives, either directly or indirectly. I was not one of those people who would spend much time downtown up until I started working on these stories. And now I find myself walking those streets, gathering string, trying to meet people. But the reason why I didn't was because it just didn't feel like it was a place for me. It felt like it was a place for commerce, retail, and for business people. And that just wasn't me. And I think a lot of people feel that way. But what isn't clear to most and what wasn't clear to me is how central what happens downtown is to the general functioning of San Francisco's economy. And that's not without consequences going forward, which I imagine that we're going to talk about.
Staying with you, Noe, through SF Next, I think the first series that caught my eye was back in May. And that was the kind of intersection, if you will, of the mayor basically floating her whole budget and then trying to raise money to address downtown. I mean, it's been festering for a while, but like everything with COVID-19, and that's why we've done this series over the last 2 years, it's just really accelerated a lot of the elements, if you will, that were there. So provide a little bit of context of what you feel like the COVID-19 has done to downtown.
Well, there's no shortage of news stories, mine included, that are going to lay out all the problems. Downtown is a mess right now. And that is because the area has become very dependent on certain companies and especially certain industries. And I think the one that people would expect, that they've probably read about the most, is tech. That downtown and San Francisco's economy as a whole, by dint of that, have become very dependent on tech. Now, when the pandemic hit, that became a problem because tech was exactly the industry that was most poised to be able to work from home, to work remotely. And that had negative consequences overnight for a lot of things. One of those was that without the office workers coming to their offices every day, and not to say that tech was the only industry, but it was a dominant one. Without those office workers showing up every day, they were not spending money, at the local cafe, the local restaurant. They weren't going out and grabbing beers after work. So the place became a sort of ghost town. And it's also that the people who work in those jobs are getting taxed in various ways. And one of those ways by the city is that if they conduct their work within the city, then they get taxed higher than if they don't. So when you have people working remotely, not only did they stop feeding the local businesses in that part of the economy, but they stopped feeding the tax revenue. And so that and a number of other knock-on effects that have happened since then and that we're prognosticating going forward mean that there are really two things to think about here. One is the actual feel and look and composition of downtown, the commercial life, the life in general is quite deteriorated compared to what it was before the pandemic. The other thing to think about is that because of that and a number of other forces that stack on, it is possible that we're going to see not just the area, but the city as a whole suffer economically going forward. And that gets into issues like, well, if people aren't going downtown, those businesses aren't thriving. The offices will maybe stay empty. As they stay empty, businesses will not renew their leases. As that happens, you could have real estate reevaluated for their tax value, their property value. And as those property values drop, tax revenue also will drop to the city. And so over maybe a span of 5 years, maybe 10, you would see a loss of revenue to City Hall, which ultimately means a reduction of City Hall's budget, which means a reduction of city services to people who live here, who, again, as I said, downtown touches a lot of lives. That is a way that people who never spend any time downtown could be very affected by what happens or doesn't in that area.
Thank you. That was a really good overview. That leads directly into your reporting, Anna. Did a really great piece just on how taxes incentivize, if you will, businesses to not have folks sitting in offices. So share with the audience about your reporting.
So the way that business taxes are structured in San Francisco are that they're based on the percentage of a company's workers that are working from SF. So whether it's from your home or from an office in downtown. And so, as Noah was saying, once COVID hit, most people come into SF for work. They don't live in SF. So everyone started working from home in the East Bay, Napa, Palo Alto, whatever. And so a lot of companies saw their tax liability to the city drop dramatically. In one case, I was talking to a tax accountant. She was saying one of her clients, their tax bill to SF had dropped 88%. So these companies are seeing significant decreases in their tax liabilities, and they actually do technically owe money. If you conduct business in a city, many cities do have business taxes, so you would owe taxes in those jurisdictions, but the reality is SF's business tax structure is just so much more expensive for companies than essentially all other cities. But it's so much more expensive And it's also so much more complex. So, for many cities, the business tax code is basically just one sheet of paper. And in SF, we have this whole portal. There's 30 people that spend 70% of their time supporting business taxes. So it's just very, very, very complicated. Yeah, so that's the situation. It is incentivizing companies to, in some cases, just move entirely out of San Francisco. And I think we heard Stripe was saying that they were paying their employees just to actually get out of the Bay Area in general. And so a lot of these companies don't even want to have one employee who's even living in San Francisco.
Well, in your example of the person who owned Books Inc. and then moving his operation, if you will, to, I believe it was Oakland, because it was cheaper to basically operate out of Oakland because he was actually being charged for having more bodies in the office.
That's exactly right. And in this article, we did kind of like a scenario analysis. So we just took Square Financial Services, which was one of the companies that complained the loudest about business taxes in SF. And we did an estimate for how much they'd owe in SF. And in SF, we estimated they'd owe about $40 million a year. If they moved to Oakland, which they did, we estimated they'd owe probably less than $10 million a year. If they moved to San Jose, it was something like less than $200,000 a year. So a lot of these companies are saving significant amounts of money by having their workers remote and or moving their office presences completely out of the city.
And it seemed in your article and also in Noah's reporting to some degree as well, San Francisco's very complex tax structure, if you will, kind of disincentivizes folks, even compared to LA, for example. I mean, both of your reporting, it's great to watch reporting to be multi-dimensional storytelling and the graphs, et cetera, all really wonderful stuff. I want to stay with taxes some more because in your piece, you also talk about more taxes forthcoming, like there's the e-commerce tax. So Can you share with the audience a little bit more about not only butts and seats tax, but all of the other tax structure?
So we're actually a very tax-happy jurisdiction. So in SF, it's remarkably easy to put a new tax on the ballot. So the Board of Supervisors can actually remove taxes, but voters need to approve taxes. But in order to put on the ballot, you need less than 10,000 signatures. So it's actually quite easy to do, and taxes tend to be quite popular in San Francisco. So as a result, the city has just approved a lot of taxes in recent years. So it's been something like 7 in the past 5 years, versus if you compare it to Oakland and San Jose, they've only changed their business tax code once in the past decade. So it's a lot of new changes and a lot of new taxes. So there's more forthcoming. So actually, the Amazon tax that you brought up for e-com companies, that's an interesting one because that actually just got removed from the ballot. And essentially what happened was there was this affordable housing provider named Todco, and they wanted to raise funds for guaranteed income, which is similar to universal basic income. And they also wanted to pair that with taxing Amazon, which polls very popularly. And so they were trying to put that on the ballot, but because our tax code is so complicated, the way it was written, it probably wasn't even going to tax Amazon just because of the way that the city calculates how you're taxed in different business categories. They didn't realize that the bulk of Amazon's business is actually in their web server hosting business, not their e-com business. So it wouldn't have even affected Amazon to begin with. So they basically didn't do their homework on that. So they've now removed it from the ballot. But they're going to actually, next cycle, I think, try to actually tax Amazon. There's a Green New Deal tax coming down the pipeline for businesses that I think Supervisor Connie Chan introduced recently. And then just in the past couple of years, there's been taxes on overpaid executives. There was the homelessness tax, Prop C, that was quite controversial, that led to like a lot of fights between these billionaires such as Jack Dorsey and Benioff. There's been all sorts of like commercial vacancy taxes, et cetera, et cetera. So we're just kind of a tax-happy jurisdiction.
Thank you. That was great context. And Noah, do you have some more that you would like to add to on tax before we dive into more of the issues that you identified in your reporting?
No, I think that was a really good overview. I don't think I would have anything to add on taxes up to now. I suspect we'll get to talking about potential taxes going forward, which is more where I could talk.
Exactly. So I want to turn to you on some of your reporting, which I found really interesting. And you touched on it in the beginning, the impact on the San Francisco economy from tourism, small business, and office space, and the return of workers estimates. I think you had in your reporting that the average annual per downtown worker was around $5,000 that they spend, and that the controller has one model versus what you thought was perhaps not reality. So share with the audience a little bit more on your reporting on all those issues.
Well, we went to many different departments at City Hall to try to vet our understanding of what was going on the ground. And one of those was the controller. And so we asked them, what percentage of people do we expect are going to be returning to their offices once society normalizes? Now, they had published two different numbers, and the most recent number, I think it was 33%. And I think that was in March of this year. They published a report saying that. So what I wanted to know from them was, why had they adjusted that compared to the prior percentage? And also, what was that percentage based on? And what I found was that it was based on the best that they could get, which was word of mouth. It was based on talking to a lot of smart people who were positioned at different places in the local economy, as well as employers. So we had building owners, we had real estate developers, brokers, if I'm not mistaken, and employers. And they sort of triangulated. I know I just named 4 different sources, but they tried to figure out, okay, what is the reasonable average? And then they gave it a little nudge and said, well, but let's move it up from what we're hearing by just a percentage point or two based on gut feel. I know this because I asked them what was the math that it was based on, and their response is in the story. And I think it's something like, it wasn't exactly based on a calculation. So we went to somebody who was basing it on a calculation, and that was Professor Richard Bloom at Stanford University. And he was working with a number of other academics. What they have been doing since nearly the beginning of the pandemic is doing monthly surveys to, if I'm not mistaken, both employers and employees. But what I know about for sure is the employees talking about what work from home policy was likely going to be once society normalized. Now, again, these surveys have been taken all throughout the pandemic. So before we get to a sort of endemic status, which I think it's fair to say we're either in or approaching, at least as far as the public dialogues are concerned. And so these were the best guesses of the people who were surveyed by him. And those best guesses kept changing from one month to the next. And it wasn't changing down. It was changing up. It was becoming a greater and greater share of the work week that people expected that whenever society normalized would be working from home. And I think at the time we published, it was somewhere around 2.3, 2.4 days per week, or about half the week. And so I think it poses the question, what is our city hall going to do? What are our city leaders going to do in response to that?
Well, staying with the topic of what is City Hall going to do, there's 2 pieces of it, and we'll weave back in the mayor's new budget number. But one of the pieces that I found in both of your reporting and in kind of nods to it, you actually called out some more with regards to the city's willingness to require its employees to actually show up in office buildings 5 days a week. So that ties directly back into Anna's whole piece about more people there, in the city. And this would be a great example to show businesses that you need to bring people back. And then that, of course, would change the dynamic of taxing. But talk a little about the politics, if you will, of City Hall requiring everybody who gets a city paycheck to actually show up at their office.
I'll be honest, this was not something that I spent a lot of reporting on. And so I will tell you that it was very difficult to get a response from the city to this question. The question being, does Mayor London Breed have the ability to require that people come back to the office 5 days a week? If so, then is there a reason why she's not exercising it? And I really didn't get a satisfying response. It's in the story. It reads like boilerplate. And I took it as, well, there must be something more going on under the surface. Since we published this story, other reporting has come out, and I want to say that the Standard has contributed to this, that puts their finger on it a little bit deeper. I think they've gotten responses since we tried to this question. And if I'm not mistaken, the general response was that the mayor would like to do it, but that there are union considerations, there are negotiations that happened between City Hall leaders and the union, and that this was one of the factors that was negotiated over. And so the mayor does not have the level of power, we'll say, is my sense, to just snap her fingers and make it happen. I don't know if she has the legal ability, but I imagine that even if that were the case, there would be political ramifications, and that's obviously part of their calculus.
Right. And Anna, anything on your end with regards to this issue of bringing back, I think the number was something close to 30,000 folks, right, that would show up again in the downtown corridor. And the downtown corridor now appears to be expanded from about City Hall all the way to the Embarcadero, and then north to Jackson Square, and then south into Salesforce Park, for example.
Unfortunately, I haven't really done any reporting on that.
Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, I can add a little bit on that. According to City Hall sources, when I spoke with them, was that city employees have been working in their offices throughout the pandemic. Now, it has not been 100%, and I don't know what the percentage is now, but we would not be going from a 0% of city workers have been in their offices to 100%. And so whatever the impact would be on, say, local commerce, for instance, downtown, if people were suddenly working at their offices near the downtown area and now they're going to go out during lunch breaks and spend on, whatever, that impact would not be as great as if nobody was there. People have been, to be clear.
Thank you. And I want to circle back to both of you and just kind of get your take on what you see from your reporting on vacant office space and retail space. Because for anyone who's spent any time in downtown, all you have to do is walk down there one time. It really, truly is a ghost town. I mean, sadly, it's better than it was in literally the fall of last year at this time, but it's still a ghost town. So Anna, your take?
Yeah, I mean, it's a ghost town. We just did a story that's been very popular today. Kevin did a story about kind of the incoming commercial real estate crash that's about to happen. Because when offices sign their leases, they have to sign them for usually 10 years. And a lot of these, when the leases are up, a lot of companies are now downsizing. And so I think you can kind of see it coming. We work very near Airbnb, and Airbnb still has its massive office, but there's nobody there ever. All I see are 5 guards outside all the time. I've never seen really any employees go in and out of that office. So it's not just that there's a lot of vacancies, but even the offices that are currently, quote, occupied are not really being occupied right now. And when the leases are up, I think that those companies, and they have been, but they will continue to downsize.
You're listening to Voices of the Community, which explores critical issues facing Northern California communities. Voices of the Community is supported by a grant from the James Irvine Foundation, dedicated to a California where all low-income workers have the power to advance economically. More at irvine.org. This is George Coster, your host, and if you're just joining us, this is the second part of the 3-part stories we are covering on how the COVID-19 pandemic has made downtown San Francisco into a ghost town. Let's get back to our conversation with San Francisco Chronicle reporter Noah Arroyo and the San Francisco Standard reporter Anna Tong about their reporting of the issues that have caused the downtown to become a ghost town and the various efforts to reinvent downtown San Francisco. And Noah, going back to you, your take on it, because this also ties back into your last 2 pieces with regards to kind of the re-envisioning of downtown and yet another study that's been funded by the city to try to bring people back with events, space, et cetera. But share a little bit about vacant office space and retail, and then, kind of ramp into what your take is on the new reinvention plans.
Complex question. Well, you're not wrong. You walk around downtown and you see that very little is lively. It's not true that there is no life going on. There's no commerce. We have seen improving figures for tourism especially, and the hotel tax is one of the primary revenue sources for City Hall. And so that is very good for the city in a general sense. And obviously those tourists are going to spend on a lot of different things, not just their hotel stays. I live in the Tenderloin, so I'm a hop, skip, and jump down the street, or I should say up the street, from the downtown area. And I see those tourists, and sometimes they spill over into my neighborhood. And frankly, it's nice to see, just because it's nice to see the streets filled with more people. That said, Anna, you had mentioned the story that your publication came out with today. Speaking of which, kudos, good story. One of the numbers in that story was something, I want to say it was back down to 30% of office workers are in their offices at this point, based on security card swipe information from Castle Systems, which has been the pretty consistent metric throughout the pandemic here, as well as in other major cities, about how is our revival going. And while other cities have trended upwards, including some in the Bay Area that are not that much better than San Francisco, but still have been trending upwards, San Francisco has fluctuated but hovered around 30 to 35%, at least as long as I've been looking at it. And that's been a while. So we see more people on the ground. I imagine that's going to be better for the downtown retail establishments on the ground floors. But at the end of the day, I think that the bigger, more ominous sign fiscally is that those offices are not filling back up. Now, there's a caveat to that, and that's that not all offices are created equal. If you're talking about what we'll say are AAA properties or trophy properties, the Salesforce Tower is an example of one of those. The very high-end office properties are, I'm told by brokers and real estate sources, they are much more populated during the day than the lower end Class C, the Class B. And so different subsets of office properties have different problems, we'll say, or different degrees of the same problem. And so all of this is the complexity that the city is going to need to grapple with when they're figuring out what the financial future of this city is and how do we access that best? How do we get there? Now, you were asking me about how all of this dovetails with my recent reporting, right?
Correct.
Okay. What we have seen from some local groups on the ground, including downtown, the SF Partnership, what seems to be the loudest nonprofit in the area. This is a business improvement district. In other words, they provide a number of services for the financial district in Jackson Square area in downtown. And what we have seen from them is a plan about how to revitalize downtown area by area. And they have a number of pilot areas. One of those that I looked at most closely was Leadsdorf. The idea is that you pump resources into these areas and you maybe tweak some of the regulations around what is allowable there. For instance, you would shut down an alleyway to car traffic so that it became more walkable. You would have pop-up businesses or pop-up restaurants in, let's say, a commercial spot that has been defunct for a number of months, which means that you'd need to coordinate with whoever owns that spot and see if they'd be cool with a business coming in and operating there for a week and having a rotating crew. You might have events. So the question is, where is the money going to come from for all of this? There are ideas about this, and the city is definitely putting forward a number of millions of dollars for this. But the idea after that is these various urban planning and design improvements to certain parts of downtown, hopefully, will start to draw more and more foot traffic to the area, more and more commerce. Now, will that be effective at increasing tourism to those areas? Probably. Will that be effective at increasing office attendance in those areas? That is a big question mark. Now, the reason why I don't say it won't is because I've talked to people who have jobs at companies that are in San Francisco as well as that are not, who are residents of San Francisco and working from home. And they have both told me, hey, if there was some event and they had free Wi-Fi outside and I could just go there, or some intersection that was closed to cars and I could hang out and there are people laughing and enjoying wine at some outdoor table, I'd go there and I'd work there all day. I asked one, how many days a week would you go there? She told me 3 to 4. I'd take my kids. So at that point, maybe what we don't have is a solution that so much brings more people back to their offices. Maybe we do, because maybe they're there during the day and they're at these events right after work or something. But at least I think what you have is increased presence, including by people who work off of a laptop, as long as Wi-Fi is supplied. And that is another big question.
And that was part of the, I think your reporting was that there's the Downtown San Francisco Partnership and then the Site Lab, what was it? The San Francisco Public Realm Action Plan.
Yes.
And the action plan was taking some of these vacant, well, they're not really vacant, but they are vacant these days, but a lot of the alleyways that were there and to activate them between Pine and California Street, for example. So I want to circle back because you also mentioned in your reporting, and, this gets back to the mayor's ability in City Hall to do something, to try to do something or to appear. And so, I've heard numbers from $9 million to $47 million that the mayor's trying to get approved through the Board of Supervisors for the budget for this year. Can you share a little bit about what you know on budget?
I can sort of. So I'm going to tell you, this is basically on background. I'm going to tell you that I have been trying to lock that down. And so what I could tell you on the record for broadcast is that the Board of Supervisors did approve money, and I could tell you a ballpark of what it is. I have not yet been able to get specifics on all the different buckets that go where. That's incoming. Now I'm hoping that Anna doesn't get it before I do, but I can tell you that.
So was the number that I saw that she was floating, or the city was floating, I think it was 9.5 million or 9.7 million was what was floated in the upcoming budget. And then there was some, I think you had some breakdown. There was some breakdown on the mayor's, site as well. But that was the number I had heard. I don't know if Anna has any updated information on that as well.
I don't at all. Actually, I haven't really looked into that. It seems really small to me. And do you know what it was for? It was for some parties and stuff like that, right? Like what the money's going towards.
That's what it appeared. It appered that the funding was to try to fund the Downtown San Francisco Partnership, San Francisco Public Realm Action Plan. That's what it appeared like. It was a typical, governmental funding, get subject matter experts to come and do a plan, buy a benefit district, and then float it in front of the Board of Supervisors. Everybody can raise their hand and say, yes, we could spend the money because there was this third-party plan.
I guess I'm so skeptical that's actually going to do anything for downtown. Like $10 million to activate downtown a little bit. I don't know. I don't think it's going to move the needle at all. That's just my opinion, though.
Yep. Noah, any update on your take on that?
Yeah, I can give you what I know of the numbers. Here's an on-record statement. During the budget deliberations that recently concluded, more than $50 million were slated to be spent over the next 2 years on pandemic recovery efforts citywide. And I think it may actually be north of 60, but I'm ballparking this because I just don't have the numbers off the top of my head. Now, of that, there are different buckets, and they will be spent on things like there's a bucket for maintaining the street ambassador program, which is designed to put people on the ground in various parts of downtown, especially the parts that are major transit hubs or that don't have presumably a lot of human presence otherwise, including like business presence where the businesses are active. And the idea is that people who are walking through or might be, near the area, that they would feel welcome to go to the area if they have a welcomer. And so there's the ambassador program. There is a bucket of money that goes toward helping businesses begin or recover financially from blows that they incurred during the pandemic. And then there's a bucket of money that will go towards things like events, public activations, the very things that we were just describing that as Downtown SF Partnership would be working on in this action plan that I did my reporting on. So in other words, there is a funding source for that work. Now, whether that's enough money remains to be seen.
I'm going to segue back to Anna on taxes, and we can go back to you, Noah, on taxes, because that's the other thing that I've read and heard, and sadly, it's back to the Great Recession when Mayor Lee lobbied to basically convert mid-market into a tech incubation zone with the mid-market tax benefit, which people both love, hate, and everyone has their opinion about it. But Anna, do you want to share a little about what your reporting thoughts and recommendations are on what folks are thinking about in taxes?
Yeah, so definitely the business leaders. So Advance SF, for instance, they're advocating for a moratorium on all new taxes. And so because they're kind of saying like, hey, businesses need stability in order to plan. And like the more you pile on new taxes, the more it becomes an untenable place to do business. Obviously, the people that are pro-taxes are going to say like, no, this little small percent we're levying on these businesses won't really move the needle. I think it is, and it's kind of unclear what the net result is going to be. So, business tax revenue as a whole, I think fell like maybe 12% in the most recent fiscal year. But the tax that was collected from Prop C fell almost 50%, so it fell 45%, and that's a tax on big business. And so, but it's unclear if like that's due to people working remotely or if it's due to businesses really moving out. And then I think the Chamber of Commerce is really advocating to bring back like the Twitter tax break that happened under Mayor Ed Lee. But that, as you said, really became pretty unpopular. And I think it triggered a lot of the hatred for tech workers in the city because they really felt that it was contributing to too much inequality. And that's what I feel like. That's something we can all agree on. Like there is so much inequality in San Francisco. So I think bringing back something like that, I think it would start to trigger a lot more anger. So, but I do think that the city needs to start thinking of good solutions to making it a more business-friendly place to work. And it can be like, we still have high taxes, but every time someone raises a mega round from $1 billion round, there should be someone in the city that calls that company and asks them what their plans are and says like, hey, we're excited for you to continue doing business in SF. Like, what are your plans for the future? Are you going to be opening a bigger office here? Let me make it easier for you. Because I think a lot of it isn't just about the money, because some of these tech companies are raking in like a lot of money, but it's just the fact that it's perceived to be an unfriendly place to do business in. And so I think that there are a lot of things that, if the city wanted to, they could do to just let businesses know that they do want them to stay, because there is the perception from business people that the city doesn't want them to be there. And, and if that's the case, that's also fine. Like, I do know there are a lot of people that think that tech really destroyed San Francisco and they don't want tech companies here. And it really wasn't until more recently that a lot of tech companies came. So if that's something we want to do with San Francisco, that's also totally fine. We can make that decision. We will just have to be comfortable with less tax revenue. So I think there's a lot of ways to go forward, and it doesn't necessarily mean, going back to the Twitter tax break.
Thank you. And Noah, would you like to add any more about taxes? And what I would also ask is if there's anything else in your reporting that you would like to share.
Sure. I'll say this. I have not looked closely at the tax question, but it has been obviously a common element in every conversation that I have with business people or with real estate developers, because it's a major factor in the ecosystem. It's a factor for consideration. Here's a bigger one, I think, for my money. Why would I want to live in San Francisco? There was a long time, I remember because I've been reporting on this stuff for about a decade, there was a long time where the general conversation that happened in the public space was that businesses would decry taxes, where they were and their increases. And the progressive politicians, so to say nothing of the moderates, but the progressive politicians would basically, let's call your bluff. You're not going to go anywhere. The reason you're not going to go anywhere is because we're freaking San Francisco. Everybody wants to be here. People want to be here. Residents want to be here. And then there was also the question of, well, with it being a tech hub, that people wanted to work for companies that were in proximity to the companies with the gravitational pull, like the Twitter, right? So I think that my sense is that the progressives were winning that argument for a long time, that as the taxes would rise, I don't think you really saw an evacuation of those tech companies and big commercial actors to the degree that people were worried about until the pandemic hit. And now, boom, they're leaving one by one. And so this conversation that we're now having about taxes, it's important, but I think that at the end of the day, I think the bigger conversation that is related to is if the reasons for people wanting to live in San Francisco have changed, and if the situation is such that you can't just reinvigorate those reasons, you can't just snap your fingers, you can't pass a certain policy, and then suddenly, the new anxieties are gone, the new objections are nullified, then maybe you need to think a little bit more fundamentally about what is San Francisco, why is San Francisco, and what are the things that, aside from taxes for businesses, are going to get people to really want to move here, maybe including businesses. I think that's a conversation that we're trying to have at SF Next as best we can with the reporting, but I would love it if our politicians would have more of that in the public space more often.
Thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that assuming that people want to be in SF is not really the reality anymore.
And it's become extraordinarily expensive to be in SF, right? With the median home price of, going north of $1.5 million. So I want to turn to our last two sections. And one is, and I always ask this in this ongoing series, and that is really how can the public get engaged in your reporting and what you've been reporting about? So, how can the public show up? Because as we started this conversation, the whole series is kind of focused on downtown SF, and it really is kind of the economic core and the engine of San Francisco. And I think a lot of people don't realize, and that's why I wanted to do this, and that's why I love your reporting, is to create more awareness. But how can folks get engaged in the process and helping nudge or move things forward?
Sure.
Besides subscribing to SF Standard, for example, or SF Chronicle. But can folks, and know maybe this is more directed towards you only because you've been on the ground and seen several of the players, but it seemed like there wasn't entry points other than going to a Board of Supervisors budget meeting to scream about how money is being spent, for example. But from your perspective, how can folks who are listening to the show actually get engaged in helping support revitalization efforts?
Sure. Well, first of all, vote. We have some elections coming up pretty soon. If there are politicians who are being forward-thinking according to you, then put your votes there. I think aside from that, pay attention to the coverage, pay attention to opportunities to show up digitally or in person to public meetings about these topics. We will be having them. What I'm hearing and what I'm reading is that our sitting politicians, our Board of Supervisors, our mayor, are very keenly aware of these problems, and they know that something has to be done. They know that they're in the hot seat to do something about it. So anytime you can show up and have your voice be heard, do that. Now, as far as engaging with us, the reporters at the Chronicle, who can say something about this at the public level, first of all, you got to follow us on Twitter. We're at SF Next, and pay attention to what we're saying and talk to us. We want to hear from you. You also need to email us. Email us what you hate about the dysfunctions in the city. Email us your ideas about how to potentially fix them. It can be about downtown. It can be about other stuff. sfnext@sfchronicle.com. That's sfnext@sfchronicle.com. We actually read those. It can be a time suck after some of our more popular stories, but it's worthwhile because we need to know what the public thinks. So do those things, stay engaged. And if you go to the Chronicle's website, there's a webpage for the SF Next project, and you can sign up for our newsletter, and we will keep you abreast of many things. Finally, last thing I'll say, you got to listen. You got to listen to the SF Next Fixing Our City podcast by my colleagues, Laura Wenis and Cynthia Lopez. They are constantly trying to look for what are the new potential solutions to the problems that are all around us in the city. And if we have to look to Denmark, if we have to look to Seattle, we're going to do it. Or if we have to look into San Francisco's past to see something that was working and that we had to stop or whatever, should we resurrect it? They're going to do that. So listen to that podcast, keep yourself informed, and get engaged.
Thank you. And Anna?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing to me, I think no one already said it, but it's pay attention and vote. I mean, a lot of tech people I know are unhappy about the way the city's being run, but I think I put a lot of it on them because a lot of these people were not paying attention to local politics at all. And I think that you're not allowed to complain if you're not really paying attention to local politics, because some of these elections and measures and who gets elected are decided by something like 100 votes. So people really do have a lot of leverage over what happens in the city. And I would say pay special attention to a lot of the ballot measures. Some of those really make me angry because you can tell that the way they're marketed is not really what's going to happen. And if you don't really want to do all the homework, I would say the Chronicle editorial board or any of these local publications will do a lot of the work for you so you can see what they're endorsing. So go to the Chronicle or go to one of your local Democratic clubs that you trust and see what they're endorsing and vote that way. But I would say don't just blindly vote for what, quote, sounds good on the ballot, because a lot of times that is really misleading. And actually, the people that are putting forth these ballot measures are allowed to market it in whatever way they want to. There's not really anything that prevents them from doing that. So just don't pay attention to the mailers and try to get more educated and definitely vote.
Thank you. And staying with you, Anna, I'm going to turn to our final question, which is, and I've been asking everybody in the 96 episodes of doing this series so far, which is, what do you think are some of the good or positive things? I know good is perhaps way out there in the world of a pandemic, but what do you feel are some of the good things that have come out of the pandemic in San Francisco to help us shine a spotlight on some of the stuff that you're reporting on?
Yeah, I mean, I come from the tech community and I really see a lot more engagement in the city. And I think that's extraordinarily positive because I think a lot of people did really take SF for granted. A lot of people just saw this as they kind of lived here and would patronize the restaurants and then just get on a shuttle and work at Google all day. And, they didn't really care about the city too much. But the people that have stayed here that haven't moved to New York or LA or wherever really are caring a lot more about the city. And it just goes beyond, that core group of people that used to be really involved before. And I think that's super positive because I think everyone should be more engaged and, people are really feeling a lot of ownership over the city. And so I think good things will happen.
Thank you. And Noah, same question.
San Francisco wasn't always this expensive. I mean, it's always been attractive. And so comparatively, it's been more expensive than many other cities, including major cities. But there were times in previous decades where you could more easily raise a family here. You could land here with very little to your name and figure it out, and you could make it work. And I think one of the negative consequences of the tech boom, well, I'm not going to be saying anything controversial if I say that came with gentrification, but I think what it also did was it allowed the city, and I'm being as broad as I can to capture politicians and dinner conversations and all of that. It allowed this city to think that we're doing okay, though. We're doing okay. It's very difficult to live here. It's even more expensive than it has been for a long time, but we're doing okay. Because look at X, Y, or Z. Look at the size of the city's budget. Look at the number of bus lines that we have because we can pay for them all, et cetera. So I think one of the things that this pandemic might do, and I say might because it hasn't done it yet, is it might force that conversation finally about, I go back to what kind of city does it want to be? What is this city's selling point to get people to move here? We've lost something like 6.7% of our population during the pandemic. I think it was the most recent census data that has been reported. And a lot of those people were younger. A lot of them were comparatively wealthier. And so we have not made a compelling argument to them. What is the compelling argument going to be to other people? And I think part of that is going to require I hope that part of that argument is going to require that we finally grapple with how damn expensive it is to live here. Let's make that a little bit more workable, make cost of living a little bit more doable. Because if we don't, then maybe we'll see people continue to leave and maybe others won't fill their slots. And that is a pretty dark future. I don't think any of us want it. And I don't think our politicians want it.
That was great. Thank you, Anna and Noah, for sharing your wonderful reporting work on how the COVID-19 pandemic is impacting downtown San Francisco through all of the numerous issues you have identified in your reporting and our discussion today. We'll make sure that listeners have your contact information, website, and social media, along with links to your reporting so they can get engaged with the issues, as well as the various solutions being proposed and executed by our local government, business, and nonprofit leaders. Please stay safe and healthy as we all work our way through the latest stage of COVID-19 and, of course, all of its variants. So thanks to both of you for being on the show today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for this episode of Voices of the Community. You've been listening to the voices of the data editor at the San Francisco Standard, Anna Tong, along with SF Next reporter from the San Francisco Chronicle, Noah Arroyo. To read Anna Tong's great reporting on downtown San Francisco, as well as her other reporting on the many issues and topics impacting San Francisco, please go to sfstandard.com/author/Anna-Tong. And to read Noah Arroyo's great reporting on both downtown as well as what is next for San Francisco through the SF Next series, please go to sfchronicle.com/author/Noah-Arroyo. And to hear part 1 of our 3 stories on downtown San Francisco, which features the voices of Chris Wright from Advanced SF and Jeff Balisario from the Bay Area Council Economic Institute, go to georgecoster.com and click on Voices of the Community, and then click on the COVID-19 series and listen to episode 95. We hope that you enjoyed the insights, points of view, and personal stories from the voices of changemakers and their nonprofits and small businesses featured in this series. To find out more and get engaged with the nonprofits, small businesses, and staff members featured in the series, please go to my website, georgecoster.com, and click on Voices of the Community to find links to the extended versions of these interviews and to listen to the entire series. After listening to these stories, we hope that you will consider making a donation and volunteering to provide a hand up to your fellow community members. Today's episode was made possible by the audio wizard and our associate producer, Eric Estrada, and the graphics magic of Casey Nance from Citron Studios, along with the wonderful crew at the San Francisco Public Press and KSFP. Voices of the Community is supported by a grant from the James Irvine Foundation, dedicated to a California where all low-income workers have the power to advance economically. More at irvine.org. Voices of the Community is a member of Intersection for the Arts, which allows us to offer you a tax deduction for your contributions. Please go to georgecoster.com and click on the donate link to make a donation to help us provide future shows just like this one. While you're on our website, you can enjoy our archived past shows, which feature community voices working on solutions to critical issues facing Northern California communities. And you can sign up for our newsletter to find out more about future shows, as well as shows and events from the organizations that are included in our episodes. Take us along on your next COVID walk by subscribing to Voices of the Community on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and Google Podcast, or wherever you get your podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at George Coster, and we'd love to hear from you with feedback and show ideas, so send us an email to george@georgecoster.com. I'm George Coster in San Francisco, and thank you for listening.